This is Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today we're going to take a look at the installation of our TJ frame center section repair kit on this 97 TJ behind us. Now, this is the same TJ that we're using in our Can the Frame Be Repaired video series. So this is going to be part of that series, and this is really going to be the first step towards repairing this frame. Now if you're interested in purchasing one of our TJ center section kits, you can go to taboocustoms.com and find those kits there. So let's take a look at the kit. Alright, so this is what you're going to get when you order our center section kit. Now this center section kit is made to fix the area where the transfer case skid plate mounts, and it's basically that straight section between the front bend and the rear bend in the frame. If you're looking at the frame, it should span from bend to bend on both the inside and the outside of the frame. You're going to get two pieces here. These are the bottom and the inside piece. These pieces are 7 gauge, so they're a lot thicker than the original frame, and that's mainly because if we're going in and we're replacing this center section, I'm going to want to make sure that it's really strong and that we get really good material back in there, because it's really the center of the Jeep and really the base of the Jeep, you know. So then you're going to get 2 outside plates that go on the outside of the frame that also are 7 gauge. You're going to get 6 weld nuts, and these weld nuts are the nuts that will go on top of these bottom pieces that go up inside of the frame, and we'll show you how to install those in a second. And then you're going to get 4 little fish mouth plates that will go around the body mounts, because typically the body mounts, even on a frame this bad, are still relatively intact. You know, we don't really need to cut those body mounts off. Most of the material around them is still okay, so we'll use these plates to basically tie in our outside plate and still make sure that area around the body mount is really strong. So the next step we're going to do, or the first step we're going to do before we really get to working on the Jeep, is we're going to go ahead and we're going to install the nuts onto the bottom plates, which is the bottom and the inside plate here. And what we've done on these plates is we've gone in and we've etched next to each hole either a P or a D, and that indicates whether that is a passenger side hole or a driver side hole. So we're going to take one of the plates and we're going to weld 3 nuts next to each of the passenger side holes. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other plate, but weld them next to the driver side holes. That way we make sure we make a passenger side assembly and a driver side assembly. Now when you're installing these nuts, they'll have a little emboss or a boss here that comes off that will help you to pilot where that nut goes. It will fit inside the hole and help it to keep it concentric to the hole. Then you can use a small 1/2-inch bolt and put it through the nut and tighten it down just to make sure you keep those nuts flat to the bottom of the plate. Once you get that done, you can go ahead and weld all around the nuts and then remove the bolts. So now to prepare the Jeep, what we've done is we went ahead and we jacked it up, got as much space underneath as we could. Then we're going to go and we've cleaned up the frame. We've taken a needle scaler to the outside of the frame, and then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take this skid plate off. So first, to do that, you're going to need to support the transmission, undo the transmission mount from the skid plate, and then remove the skid plate. Once we have that out of the way, we'll talk about the other things we'll need to deal with under the Jeep. Alright, so we've pulled the transfer case skid plate. Now a few things when you're getting ready to pull this that are could cause you some problems. When you go to pull the nuts off the transfer case mount, the transmission mount here, sometimes the studs will break off, so you might want to lube those with some penetrating oil before you do try to take them out. In our case, we did have one of the 4 studs break off, which typically if I have one of the 4 break off, I'll roll with it. If I had 2 break off, I'd probably replace the mount, but we'll also check the mount out. Good chance the mount might need replaced anyway. Before you do pull it off though, also make sure you go in and you dump all the rust on you and mark where those studs are actually at in that transfer case mount. That will help you when we go to line this back up in the same orientation. It should help us to get it back in the same place because they are slotted. Now on the larger bolts on the outside, obviously on the driver's side we didn't really have to worry about it. I had to go in and cut a little piece of the frame. That was all that was left that was hanging on the driver's side. On the passenger side though, I did have to go and take the bolts out. Now there's a couple of things that could happen when you go to pull these bolts out. They come out, which if you're fixing this, it's probably not going to just come out like that. They break off, which actually isn't a bad deal. So we broke one off, or they pretty much just spin in the frame, kind of like this one here, where it just basically took the chunk of frame and spun in it. This one just kind of spun out of the nut, so it did come out fairly clean. But you can kind of see what happens to these bolts inside this frame, where you can see it was a roughly 1/2 inch bolt. It's basically worn down because of the rust down to about a 5/16 nub with no threads on it that was up above the nut there. So now that we've got this out, we'll need to go and we'll need to pull a few more things out from under the Jeep. Now we're going to do a couple of plates on this. We're going to do a front kit around the control arms. We're going to do a rear kit around the control arms. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull the exhaust off. Now if you're just doing the center section, you may not necessarily need to pull the exhaust off. On this Jeep here, we could probably actually work around it, but we're going to do those other kits. We're just going to pull it off. On the driver's side, you've got the fuel line, the brake line, the vent line for the fuel tank, and then you also have the wiring for the transfer case. So all of that, you'll have to unbolt the brake line and move it towards the center of the Jeep, away from the frame to get it out of the way. And then you'll go ahead and need to pull those little plastic holders for all those items off of the frame, because we'll need them out of the way to go ahead and weld the kit up. Okay, so we've cleaned all the items out from underneath the Jeep that we needed to get out of there. Got the brake lines, the fuel line, all that away from the frame. I also took out the exhaust in this Jeep, and that's mainly because we're going to do these rear sections as well. If you're just doing the center section, you may not want to, if you can work around the exhaust, I would leave it in there. Exhaust is always the biggest pain in the butt to try to remove from a Jeep and to remove cleanly. And to get this one out, we actually had to cut it into a couple of different pieces with the plasma cutter just to get it out, so we're going to have to weld it back together when we go to put it back in. So now the next step is we can start to prep the frame to install the plates. What you can do, and this is somewhat optional, but what I like to do is go ahead and mark on the frame if I still have holes available. But like up here on this frame, 4 out of the 6 holes, that bolt holes here, actually fell out of the frame. They're just large holes in there now. But what we're going to need to do is go and clear out the frame here about 2.5 inches to clear the nuts that are on the bottom of the inside and bottom plates. Being that this is a rust repair issue here, we're going to go ahead and probably cut out quite a bit of this frame here, just so we don't have to worry about making sure it gets, we get it lined up. Because if you don't get enough cut out, what's going to happen is your plates won't line up. You're going to have to pull it back out, cut some more. So if you can, just go ahead and be kind of liberal with your cuts there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the inside and the bottom plates and we're going to fit them up inside the frame. So as I mentioned, when you get in here, you'll be able to find 2 curves in the frame. There's one right up here behind this body mount, and then there's one right back here, right around this area. And if you feel on the inside of the frame, you'll be able to feel them. So we're going to take our plates, fit them up, and basically make it about even between those 2 bends in the frame. Then we're going to mark out the plate and go ahead and clean the frame off, because that's where we're going to actually be welding to. Okay, so now we've got the frame all cleaned up and ready for our inside and bottom plates. But before we get to that, we're going to have to prep our skid plate. And chances are that if you have a Jeep that's really rusted, the skid plate came out with some of the bolts still stuck to the skid plate, because the nut came out with the skid plate, or what's left of the nut that was inside the frame. Now if you're lucky, and this skid plate is interesting because one side of the frame is really bad, the other side was bad but not as bad as the one side. Now on this side that wasn't so bad, the skid plate is still fairly solid. So what we were able to do was take a hammer and just hit the top of what used to be our bolt, and the nut basically just disintegrated and it pushed the bolt out, and that worked for all 3 of these on this side. However, once we got to this side, we noticed that the skid plate itself was pretty well rusted out. So if you try to hit that bolt on the back side of it, the chances are you're just going to start breaking the skid plate. So what we will do is we'll actually go in and we will cut diagonally into that bolt, and typically there's not a whole lot still holding the bolt in. Once you kind of get down through there, you can take a hammer, knock the top of this bolt off here, and then tap it downward and it will pop out. Now if you do have a skid plate that looks like this, we are working on developing a kit to fix this skid plate, or obviously you can go find a different skid plate in a junkyard or off another Jeep that's in better shape. But right now, as far as when this video is being recorded here in October 2020, we currently don't have this release. So if you are looking for this in the future, we should have something available in the future if you do want to patch your skid plate in these areas, because typically the skid plates will stay really solid except for where it mounts to the frame, because rust just breeds more rust, and so it just kind of takes up what the frame has been doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue getting this this Jeep here ready, this skid plate ready, and then we're going to mount our side plates, our center section plates to this, and then we'll go ahead and put it in the Jeep and see how we can get it to fit. Alright, so now that we've got the skid plate all cleaned up and ready to go, the next step is to go ahead and attach these, the bottom and the inside plates to the skid plate. Now, obviously, you're going to want to make sure you put the passenger side on the passenger side, the driver's side on the driver's side, and they will extend forward, in front of the skid plate a little bit. Now, if you put the nuts in the wrong places on the plates, here's where you're going to find out, because they aren't going to fit. One of them won't fit. Now, the bolt pattern for the passenger side to the driver's side is a little different, so like I said, you really can't fit this one on this side, and vice versa. They won't bolt up exactly. Now, if by chance for some reason your bolts actually came out clean, we would recommend reusing the stock bolts with the cone on them to help you to center this skid plate up. If they didn't come out clean, which is going to probably be 98% of the time, we do have the stock bolts available with the cones. Now, today we actually don't have any of those on hand, so what we've done is we've gone ahead and we've used just regular 1/2-inch bolts that we're going to use to basically help to line these up. So this next step we're going to slide this underneath the Jeep, and it typically will help to have an extra set of hands with you, because you're going to have to slide this under the Jeep, raise it up, align these somewhat to the frame, and then we're going to have to use some C-clamps to hold this to the frame, because our real goal is to bolt the skid plate to the transmission mount. That way we can kind of use the transmission mount and then where we're at on the sides to line everything up. So let's go ahead and start with that. So as you raise this up, the first thing you're going to run into is making sure that these go inside the frame and don't get caught up on the inside the frame section we've actually gone and cut out here. And the other thing is you got to make sure it's lined up with the transfer case mount. So you can kind of watch from the rear here, and you'll be able to see where the transfer case mount is in the slots. And you can raise it up. And get it in the slots. So you're going to want to raise it up till it pretty much gets tight up against the frame. Then you'll need a couple of C-clamps, and these are 6-inch C-clamps, and you'll need to have a fairly narrow neck up here at the top, because you're going to put these right here by the body mount near the center bolt and use those to actually hold the skid plate up temporarily You'll put one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. We'll hold it up temporarily, then we'll drop this. Now when you drop this, make sure that this isn't going to want to fall. If you get them here in the center, make sure they're decently tight. It should stay pretty captive. So, and what we're trying to do now is we're going to try to get the bolts on the transmission mount here in the center. Now you may have to lower the transmission a little bit to be able to get those in there. But anyway, that's our next step, is we're going to put the bolts on the transmission mount, and then we'll start working on lining up our side plates here. Alright, so we've gotten the skid plate mounted to our transmission mount. We've removed the jack from underneath, and we currently just have this one jack that's holding up the transmission, and now the skid plate so that we can use it to line up the plates. So if you've done everything correctly and you've put the skid plate back in the same place using the marks we put on the slots earlier, everything should fall back into place really nicely. And this one is no exception. The plates here flush up to the bottom, they're flushed up to the inside, and went right back into place without any issue. Then what we did is, typically, well, hopefully on your Jeep you do have one area where the frame is still the full height. Typically that's going to be here in the front, and if you do, you have a little bit of space to now take the C-clamp we had here in the middle, move it to the front to now clamp this plate up to the bottom, because it's really key that you have this bottom plate parallel to the bottom of the frame. Then you can also, if you wish, take another C-clamp and bolt it to the, and clamp it to the inside, clamp it to the sides here to pull the inside to the frame. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do this at both this side and the other side, just to make sure that everything is lined up correctly before we really start tacking everything together. So we've already got the clamp on the other side. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go in and we're going to put a tack on the inside corner of this front corner, because we know that this dimension here is now correct and the inside is pulled up against the inside of the frame. Once we get that tack into place, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to come back here to the back part of the frame, and because there really isn't any frame left, we're going to have to manipulate it a little bit to get the correct dimension. And really, once you got this clamped, we won't have to manipulate it very much. We'll actually need to just raise it up just a hair. And what we'll do is we'll actually get this to the correct dimension and clamp it here on the inside, and then go inside and tack it back here in the back. And then we'll do that to the driver's side, and we'll move on to our next step, which will be putting on the plates on the outside. Alright, so we've tacked the inside and the bottom plates in place, and now we can start working on our outside plate. So the outside plate here will fit over the body mount, and you may have to move it back and forth slightly. You should pretty much be able to get it close to flush with the ends. If it's an eighth or so off, it's not a huge deal. So what you're going to have to do is get it to where you want it, and then just like the inside, mark it out with a piece of chalk where you're going to need to grind off all the rust. So once you get that done, you can then go in here and you can tack this in place. But you really have a decision to make at this point. Now the way this is designed, you could tack this to the bottom plate here only, then you could pull everything back apart and weld the inside as well as the outside of this seam here. Now we've left a pretty good ledge coming out here so that you can get a very strong weld, and being that these are 7-gauge plates, you could get a single weld here on the outside and it will be sufficient. Now the difference, I would say, between whether, I would decide whether to weld it on the inside and the outside or just the outside, would probably be that if you're trying to do this repair and you're using a 110 welder or a small welder that when you get to 7 gauge is really pushing the amperage of that welder, at that point, yes, I would probably pull it apart and weld those on both the inside and the outside. Not that I'm recommending that you do this repair with a 110 welder. I am recommending that you use a 220 welder, but I'm not saying that it can't be done. So being that we obviously have a big 220 welder, we're going to put this plate up here and we're going to weld this solid along its bottom, and then we're basically going to weld solid all the way around this outside plate. Now once we get all of those plates, the inside plate, the outside plate, all welded solid, we're going to take these small plates here, these small plates that go around the body mount, and we haven't cleaned the body mount off yet, but what we need to do is we'll need to clean this body mount off. There's a little piece of weld sticking up there. Clean it off so it's flat against the outside plate. That way we can weld on both the inside and the outside of the body mount, and then weld all around this plate to ensure we have a lot of strength across where this body mount is mounted. Okay, so we've removed the skid plate and we solid welded the inside plate, the outside plate, and our plates to go around the body mount here. A couple things to think about when you're doing this. If you have any gaps, you're going to want to close those gaps up with a C-clamp or something else, just to make sure that these plates are up against the frame. Then also, one thing is this is a pretty important section of the frame. Not that other areas aren't as important, but the center section here is really an important section. So make sure that if you're not comfortable with your welding skills, we would highly recommend that you find someone that is experienced in welding and can go in here and make sure that it gives you a solid center to build off of. And that's actually what we're going to do with this Jeep. We went in, we did the center section first because we're going to kind of build off of that center section. You can tell, we obviously need to do quite a bit of work to the rear here. And on the driver's side, we're also going to need to do some work to the front. This side, we actually was able to weld it across the bottom. The frame up here is still pretty good for about 8 to 10 inches back inside of this kit. So we've decided that this area here is good, but on the driver's side, we're going to end up going in and replacing that. So if you're interested in purchasing one of these kits, you can visit us on taboocustoms.com. We'll have the kits available there for sale. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to get a hold of us on our website as well. And thank you for watching the video, and as always, if this has helped you, a like or subscribe is greatly appreciated.